Welcome to this week's Monument Monday, and this week I am joined by tour guide and musician Martin Byrne, and Martin is a guide at Parks Castle. And you'll remember Martin before, he gave us a wonderful tour of Creevy Keel Court Tomb. And today we are at another court tomb, and this is another very well known one here in Sligo, and it's called Deerpark. So Martin's going to give us a tour around the site, and Martin, we're standing here now at what would have been the entrance to the tomb.
Yes, Tamlin, here we are at on the summit of a hill, and we have this absolutely amazing monument spread before us, and this is the entrance that leads into, it's what's called a central court cairn or a central court tomb. And you'll see when we get in there, it used to be known in the Victorian times as the Sligo Stonehenge, or the Irish Stonehenge even, which is great because we're always comparing our monuments to Stonehenge. So we actually had a monument that some people thought was actually more impressive than Stonehenge with smaller stones.
Excellent.
The monument itself is what you would call a central court cairn, and that means that the court is actually in the centre of the monument. And we call it a court cairn or a court tomb now, but the cairn, as I mentioned, is gone at the moment. But this cairn was, I believe, 50 metres long and about 20 metres wide, so a huge oval-shaped monument. And when you come in then through the passageway, we would have been coming in through the cairn, and the walls would have been quite high up around us possibly. I think the idea, it's thought to be to restrict people from looking at what is going on inside the monument if there's any kind of rituals or things happening in here. It's to block off the view of the horizon. And then we have three burial chambers, or three chambers here at Deerpark. We have the large chamber over here to the west, which is a single chamber, and that's divided inside by a pair of jambs. And on the opposite side, we have two smaller chambers. And you can see this lintel over here, which is very, very badly cracked, but that will give you an idea of why the place was called the Sligo Stonehenge, or the Irish Stonehenge, because you have these hanging lintels up over the entrance. There was a second lintel over this entrance here, and you can see it here, it's fallen. So this is the lintel which stood on the top of these two portals here, and as far as I know, I think I read this in a newspaper clipping, this lintel was pushed over around 1920, just over 100 years ago, in an act of vandalism. The same as what happened at Creevy Keel, I think that was in the 1890s, and it happened to several other monuments up in Donegal as well. Just people, there was a fad of going around pushing lintels off monuments.
Oh, what a shame.
So it's it would be lovely to see it actually restored, because we do have photographs of it from around maybe 1895 or so and around 1910. I do have a photograph to show you of this monument, which was taken by the photographer William Green back maybe around 1910. And you can see that this lintel was in much better condition at that time, and sitting a bit more level on the top of the stone.
The crack was in it then as well.
The crack was in it then as well, yeah. So it's kind of surprising that this is the one that is still standing, because this would have been the easier of the lintels to knock over, you would imagine. Yeah.
Do you want to go inside and
yeah,
show
sure,
me what you're...
I'll show you now. So I'm going
and I'll meet you in there.
I'm going even deeper into the land of the dead here. It's not so easy to get into. You need to be a bit of a limbo dancer. You'd have to wonder, were the people smaller at the time, or was the whole idea that you had to kind of get down and crawl in and crawl out? There's definitely an element of birth and rebirth about these monuments. I think all megaliths have it in them. So now here we are, we're inside, well I'm inside anyway, the northernmost of the two parallel chambers here. And you can see this long, narrow gallery, and this would be fairly typical of a court style monument. It's about 7 metres long, and it's subdivided inside, so we have a pair of jambs here, which are two kind of door stones almost, and they form a second portal on the inside. And originally there would have been another lintel covering the top of this. And then when you go through the second portal, you'd be in, I suppose, what would be the Holy of Holies of the monument. This would be the interior, or the deepest recess. And this here would be the backstone of the monument. But there are a few interesting theories about what the monument was actually about. And my favourite is by O'Rourke, who wrote the famous History of Sligo. And O'Rourke believed that these openings, you can see this one here, that these openings were actually kennels, and that there was kind of almost like animal gladiator kind of championships going on here. So O'Rourke believed that there were wolves, boars and badgers kept here, and that, like, you know, the badger might be kept in this side over here, and the boar might be kept over here, and that they would be let out to fight it to the death in this arena, and that people would be watching them from around the outside of the court. I think it's an absolutely fascinating but crazy theory about what the site might have been used for. And then maybe the wolf would be let out of this chamber over here to tackle the boar after the boar had killed the badger. Who could say, you know?
There was a lot of animal remains found in this tomb. Was he
There were-
basing any of this on that, or is it just a theory he had?
I think it might be just a theory he
Yeah.
had. O'Rourke was very, very interesting because he was almost like having a kind of a knee-jerk to Wood Martin. And anything Wood Martin said, O'Rourke had to kind of almost have another theory. But I do think it's pretty fascinating.
Bit of rivalry.
Yeah, yeah. So we could say this is the wolf den here, you might call it, or the hound. Now again, this lintel has been pushed over in 1920, and you can see it now. It's quite sad, really, to see it lying on the ground here. It's over 2 meters long. I think it's 2.1 meters long. But we do have a photograph of it again from Green. William Green, who visited here in possibly around 1910. So that shows the lintel of this chamber before it was pushed over, and give you an idea of what it should look like. So the lintel would have sat up here on these two portal stones and over the doorway, and again there you have your triathlon, and that's what this place was famous for, the triathlons, which were like the monuments in Stonehenge, and that's how it got its name, the Sligo Stonehenge, or the Irish Stonehenge. So we'll go in and have a look at this chamber.
So that would have left it, again, similar to the other chambers, a very narrow space to crawl in.
Yes, the openings in these monuments are always fairly small, and the same with passage graves as well. And there seems to be this idea involved in them. It's part of the design of the monuments. There's a sense of birth and rebirth about these monuments. They really are stone wombs, and there is a notion maybe of people who were buried here being reborn in the monuments. That's my own theory anyway, but I think there's a certain sense to it. They're artificial caves, and the Irish word for a cave is uav, and uav is also the Irish word for a womb. So these things really are stone wombs.
Wow. And this is a very impressive stone at the back here,
yes,
Martin.
This is a huge slab of rock here. So this chamber here is about the same length as the other two chambers we saw on the other side of the court. It's about 7 meters long, but it's much, much wider. It's a single chamber. I think it's about 3 meters wide. And again, it has these twin portal stones here. And there possibly would have been more stones on top of this again, but maybe it was just a very, very small opening that you came through. And again, we're in the inner recess here, and we have this massive square backstone at the back of it. And outside that, you have a very, very large slab leaning against it, and that is believed to be possibly the capstone of the monument that was maybe too large to break up or to move. But it's a displaced corbel or capstone of the roof of this chamber. It's about the same size as the chamber in Creevykeel, and there would have been corbels. This could possibly be a corbel here, and the corbels would have come up like a slated roof, and they would have overlapped gradually until they were covered by a capstone right up on the top. And the top of this monument could easily have been maybe 3 or 4 meters above ground level. So an absolutely massive artificial cave. That's what we're standing in.
So presumably once you entered into the chamber, you might have had enough headroom to stand.
Quite possibly. The one that I've been in Donegal certainly had, that had lots and lots of head clearance. And chambers like Newgrange with their corbel ceilings as well, that the ceilings are lots and lots of room in them. So quite a roomy area in here. You could fit quite a few people in here.
And some of the wedge tombs would have a roof stone that, will go from the orthostrats on the outside right across.
Yeah.
And you see those up in the Cavan Byrne.
Yeah.
Huge slabs of stone that form basically a flat roof.
Yeah.
So we're looking at something like a beehive shaped
Something much more like a
formation.
beehive, a kind of a corbel with the overlapping stones, each stone overlapping the stone below it, and projecting a little bit further out, and then the next one would come a little bit further out and further out. And it's a real balancing act as well to get them all to stay without collapsing. And it's probably one of the reasons why we don't have so many of them intact, is because they were such large chambers and they were covering such a large area inside.
And something that I find interesting about this tomb is when you look at it in plan, from above, you can see that these chambers that we're in here are just slightly off kilter.
That would seem to suggest that this monument was a multi-phase monument, and that has been suggested. Like I think we saw that at Creevy Keel as well. So more than likely, one of the chambers was the original earlier chamber, and then the monument was more than likely extended after a period of time. And if I was to guess, I would imagine that the two narrow chambers on the other side of the court were the original chambers, because the court seems to be more regular towards them, whereas this chamber that we're on, we're standing in, is slightly off kilter. It's kind of at a different angle or a different axis to those monuments. So it would suggest it was possibly built at a later time.
Yeah,
Later
and
edition.
almost like a deliberate off-kilter appearance to it, because there is room on that side to make it a straight, parallel with the other chambers at that end.
Absolutely.
So
Now,
there's obviously some purpose to putting it like this.
Yes, you always hear in Irish archaeology, you hear a lot about astronomy, and you hear a lot about monuments and passage graves having alignments, and it possibly hasn't been looked at properly that court tombs may have similar alignments. And I know that there is some kind of an alignment at Creevy Keel around the equinoxes, but this monument is facing roughly east-west, and the two chambers over on the other side are pointing more or less towards Knocknarea. And we're heading towards the equinox now, so if you didn't have all these trees around, there's a good chance that if you were up here of an evening at sunset, you would see the sun setting over Knocknarea in the distance anyway, but you would more than likely have some kind of a solar illumination or a lunar illumination in those chambers. And then this monument, this chamber we're in here, is pointing towards a sunrise, so an equinox sunrise. So I believe myself that there's plenty of scope for that kind of research to be done, and there's no reason why these people would not have had an interest in astronomy.
That might account for this slightly different orientation of these.
Exactly, it might be
chambers.
pointing towards something specific, and that may also be something to do with the landscape, which again we can't see it at the moment because of all the trees over here, but there's no reason why it could be pointing towards a mountain on the horizon, or it could be pointing towards a specific sunrise around that time.
Well, that's really fascinating. Thank you again, Martin, for another very interesting tour of a court tomb. Thank you very much, Martin, from Deerpark in County Sligo.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me.